All right. All right. Welcome back. Thanks so much for joining us. As always, we appreciate your time. We know you have many options. I today have a guest again. My brother Jason decided, hey, let's get back together and do that again. That was kind of interesting. And so here we are. We are going to roll into something that let's be real. I don't know that either one of us are totally prepared for. And so you're going to get to hear us process this content live time. So it may sound different. It may work out fantastic. I'm gonna be honest. I'm gonna just disclaimer here real quick. I may say something really dumb in this one because when I'm less prepared, I'm more likely to say something dumb. That being said, that's part of the process. That's how we learn and grow. So we're just going to go ahead and get rolling. The topic that we discussed, bringing up today. Well, we actually threw out a bunch of things today, but the one we settled on, we're going to address look at that. I'm already fumbling my words. There you go. Toxic masculinity. All right. And that's a topic that's really tough to discuss today because all of this changing gender norm stuff that's going on. And, the reality that a lot of men can do a lot of things and a lot of women can do a lot of things. And, we're just rolling into this category with so many options and so many avenues we could go down. And we're just going to see where it goes. We do have a start spot. That is about the only thing that we've decided on. Let's have a start spot. And with that, we're going to roll into a definition. I believe we are going to use the site that's 100% reliable. That was sarcasm for those of you who don't know sarcasm right off the bat. But we are going to roll into a Wikipedia definition of toxic masculinity. See, I got it right that time, folks. All right, my brother actually has that definition in front of him, so he's going to roll with that, and then we're off.
All right, it's a set of certain male behaviors associated with harm to society and men themselves. Traditional stereotypes of men as socially dominant, along with related traits such as misogyny and homophobia, can be considered toxic due in part to their promotion of violence, including sexual assault and domestic violence.
Oh my gosh. I'm actually right now jotting down some notes. Those of you who are watching on Rumble or YouTube, you're seeing me look straight down because I honestly, he read part of it to me, but I did not hear the end of that the first time. So this is really my first time hearing. So male dominant. I heard like it's male dominance. That word is in there. Is that correct?
Socially dominant.
Socially. Oh my gosh. Okay. So we are toxic. We're talking toxic masculinity. We're not talking about masculinity. We're talking about the toxic version of it. And so socially dominant, I guess that fits. Well, I'm wrestling with the misogyny, homophobia, and violence. Like those were three things that were brought up at the latter part of that, which is the first time that I've heard it. Can you read that part again for me? Because I'm trying to break that down in my brain.
Traditional stereotypes of men as socially dominant, along with related traits such as misogyny and homophobia, can be considered toxic due in part to their promotion of violence, including sexual assault and domestic violence.
Okay. So toxic means it's promoting violence.
That's what it sounds like. So this is weird because if you just go through that and you just restate it, but instead of using the words, you say related traits such as hatred or contempt for women, hatred towards homosexual behavior, or violence, which include physical assault and assault of family members. So I just restated it using other words instead of the words that were used in there. Which okay. I guess, I mean, okay, fine, I agree. That's all that's toxic, right? I mean,
Maybe. Okay. So let me throw this idea at you.
all right.
What about emotional dysregulation? People emotionally dysregulate routinely. Men, women, little kids, adults, like people dysregulate emotionally. And emotional dysregulation often comes with a pattern of blind sprinting. You can't see where you're going, but you're going 100% in a direction. And you run into things, you make a mess. It's not good. In that, we often say, so I often do this with clients sitting in my office when they're sitting on the couch and they're venting. Somewhere between, I don't know, 25 and 75% of what they say, they don't mean. Now, I'm not saying that it's right that they're being mean or disrespectful in their venting, but if we know they're venting or emotionally dysregulated, if we know that's happening, then we have to take their words with a grain of salt, because they can't control that overflow as well as they normally would be able to. And so they can express hatred or, even things that people would classify in the category of misogyny, homophobia, or things that would perpetuate violence. They saying things something like, seriously, I could kill them, but they don't mean it. They don't mean it. They're, that underneath that emotional dysregulation is not that level of hatred, but it comes out really ugly. Does that make sense?
Yes. I'm just trying to, I'm trying to process that because because that's a different plane of consciousness, because you're thinking about it in a sense where you're trying to put yourself in a position to where you're letting your emotions overflow. And so you go to a phantom place where you feel safe and you can say something like that, even if it's not real. Right. Mm-hmm. Am I stating that correctly? Like,
I mean, it sounds good to me. I mean, what you're talking about is the waking dream state. It's the idea of we have to have a safe place to process. We often do that in our dream, right? Where we're unbound by gravity and oxygen and all the other normal things of life, and we can just process. But when we're awake, well, we can't process that way until we put ourselves in a place. For instance, I talk about the different levels of safety: emotional safety, relational safety, spiritual safety, environmental safety, and stuff like that, physical safety. We go to a place where we are safe, and then we process it. We get it out in the open, and it's messy, and it's gross, and it's ugly. But yeah, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. So are you saying then that can be interpreted as toxic masculinity, even though it might not be?
Absolutely. Especially now, like when I translate that into 2023, which is what we're in 2023, everybody's got a phone, a device that records things that used to be done in private, often now are public. And so where we used to be really, truly safe, we now are not. And so we are learning as a human race that, wow, I'm not safe anywhere, which is horrible. But that's, I mean, obviously why I have a job, right. I see people and, I create safe space where there is no recording going on. Like they can say whatever they want to say. They could be mad. They could be, whatever. But right now you go out in the public, you're on the sidewalk and you say something and somebody turns around and screams, misogynist, you're horrible. You're a terrible human being. And you're like, I was having a conversation with a friend. I was venting, thinking I was safe, but clearly I was not. And so we get all of these perceptions that there's a ton of toxic masculinity, when all reality might point to a very different version. It might be men actually learning how to talk about crap. I mean, I'm not saying it's that way, but it could be. Like, that's a different way of looking at the same problem.
Yeah. And part of like the follow-on of the definition here is it discusses that safe space in a way. And it says boys will be boys. And another way that's not in here that I've heard is where it's locker room talk, right? Those are safe spaces apparently historically, right? Is that toxic masculinity then? So are the safe spaces, if boys are being boys or you have locker room talk, are they toxically masculine, or are they learning how to be masculine? That might be interesting.
Yeah. Okay. We'll go down that path. The difference between toxic masculinity and masculinity. Like, what then is masculinity?
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting.
Because I've done a bunch of stuff on this one in the past, but I want to hear your thoughts. Like, what is your thought?
You know, it's learning how to use I guess the testosterone, which would, I guess, the difference between masculinity and femininity might be the different hormones that we possess. So true masculinity is learning how to harness the power that testosterone provides to the upper end of the spectrum of being male, that enables you to provide that protective cover that is usually associated with being a male, I think. And so that's what masculinity is. It's that power, speed, and strength along that spectrum, and learning how to control that. That would be my definition. It might be weak. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud here, but
well, whatever it is, I don't know why, but on this part, I've spent a lot of time on that, like that. So when you're talking about basically maleness, the idea of being a protector, here's the thing. When you look at the difference between masculine and feminine, they're both protectors. They're just protectors in different ways, typically. And those ways, this is where, when we talk about, gender norms, when we talk about a social attribution of what is within the male spectrum and the female spectrum, we end up in this debate right here where it's, well, women can protect as good as men, sometimes better, depending on the situation. I mean, in all reality, in a social situation, I'm going to take my wife's, her interpretation of the social situation. I'm going to take that very seriously, because she has a different way of picking up information than I do. And oftentimes it's better. It's going to create a better safety for me, for my family, for the people that I don't know and don't even know that I should care about. Right? Like, she's going to pick up stuff that I don't pick up. And in that way, she's more protective in certain situations. But what you then went on to attribute was power, speed, strength. Well, some people would argue, because there's the overlap between the male and the female spectrums, well, some women are stronger than men. That's a fact. That's true. So should they be relegated to some other version of, the protection scale? No. But generally speaking, these norms, these social norms, fall on a spectrum. And the vast majority of men, this is reality. This is not from my vantage point. This is reality. the vast majority of men are going to out-strengthen the vast majority of women. I think that's a biological real statement. Now there's confusion being added to it because of all the, gender transformations where you've got, a previously male swimmer swimming on female teams and addressing themselves as female. And it's creating tons and tons of confusion. That being said, the power, speed, and strength piece, what is the significance of that within the dynamic of masculinity, not toxic masculinity?
Yeah. Okay. So if your example of a social situation where your wife becomes the protector in that scenario, I would say the power, speed, and strength comes in an environmental situation. So we're talking in a dangerous situation in public, let's say, or out in the woods. That's where the environmental factors coincide with the masculinity that the male would bring in order to provide the needed protection. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about another dangerous man or a dangerous animal or a dangerous situation like a storm of some sort. Whatever it is, it's environmental. And now we can harness our masculinity in that situation to protect ourselves and our families or whoever's with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would not be toxic in that situation. That would be just plain old protection.
Yeah.
There was a video I saw, I'd like to say in the last week or two, that was floating around on social media. That was a man who literally climbs out of a window. Now, let me preface. There's a baby hanging from a window, like, a toddler, like maybe a 2-year-old. And there's several stories off the ground. And this man literally climbs out a window up above and goes like monkey style, like hanging, from the building, reaches down, grabs the baby, basically tosses them in the window, more or less, and then climbs back in the building. Like, is that toxic masculinity, or is that just masculinity?
That's just masculinity. But check this out. Wait. So I saw a video probably a month or two ago of I want to say it was a rabid possum or a rabid raccoon that had, or maybe it was a coyote. I don't remember the animal. Whatever it was small, but brutal. I mean, it's a wild animal, right? It grabbed a hold of a kid, and the mom was unlocking the door or opening the door, recognized this because the kid was screaming, and like literally ran over, like grabbed the animal, and the animal kind of turned on her, and like she's like yelling, get inside, and she's holding the animal like this, and she's like walking away and like throws it. Right?
Yeah.
Like, so both characteristics exist simultaneously, right? Like was she being masculine? Well, I don't know. Socially, or I mean, not socially, but like by definition, yes.
No, according to social norms.
Or yeah, social norms. There you go.
According to social norms, absolutely. Like, people are going to be like, was she on steroids? Like, I mean, not
just a regular mom. Yeah.
She was a mom that was, most likely seeing the urgency and the need, saying, nobody else is going to do this for us. It's got to be me.
Yeah.
And that's cool. She just went ham on that animal.
Big time. Yeah. It was cool to see. It was awesome. But, okay. So wait, I got a random segue that might push us into a different area, but, let's say we go down the road of femininity, right? So you have, the social norms of femininity, which would be like a comforting, and, empathy, and maybe better listening skills than the masculine traits in a social situations. How can a man do that in this environment?
You mean empathy and
Yeah. So let's say you see, okay, so let's say if I saw a video, I want to say it was a comedian talking about how if a baby's crying and they're in a store and they're alone, and the woman walks up to a baby or a toddler and says, "Hey, how you doing? You know, where's your parents?" You're talking, right? How about what if a man were to do that in that situation? What would be the perspective of the masculine versus the feminine characteristics in that situation?
ooh,
That's tricky,
okay.
right?
Well, it's tricky because the first okay, because of the same stereotypes that lead us toward toxic masculinity,
Yeah.
on the other end of the spectrum, there is this often, right or wrong, there's often this perception of, why is that man talking to that child? Right?
And yeah. And is the child crying because the man is talking? Like, what if
That's
someone comes
right.
in after this situation? That's weird, right?
Right. You get that. Is he a creeper? It's like, that's the word that I would
Yeah.
say people would associate with it. Like, oh, is he just a creeper? Is he trying to kidnap that kid?
Right.
Or like, but in all reality, that's an empathetic man. Uh, okay. So from a therapeutic lens, I
Yeah.
would say empathy. I actually keyed in on that word right when you said it, because that's um, an important word in
Mhm.
the mental health profession. Men should be empathetic. Unfortunately, there's this history that has happened where there have been, and here's the thing, there's creepy men and creepy women. Let's be real. Like there's good and bad of every kind.
Mhm.
And so but for whatever reason, historically, we have created this paradigm that you got to be really, really cautious around men, because historically men have been more aggressive um, uh, in their nastiness when they get nasty,
Their
right? Like,
pursuits of malicious behavior.
yes, much better way of saying it. And so we're fighting the old paradigm as men actually exhibit empathy. And I would suggest even that, going back in time, I would say most men probably were more empathetic than not. It's just really loud and aggressive men have kind of gotten the news cycle. They
Mhm.
steal the scene, much like right now we're seeing men and women and and transgender, they're stealing the news cycles. And so it looks like it's all men, even though it's not all men. It's not even
Mhm.
probably half men. It's probably not even 3/4 of them.
Mhm.
Like there's, you're probably talking about a small percentage, but they're dominating the news cycle.
Mhm.
Or they're in dominant positions, right? Like they
Yeah.
percolate toward the top somehow, which does lead into that whole conversation, which I don't think we should get into it today, but later on, maybe at some other time, is what do you do about the male dominant culture? um which I don't know. I mean, I think we've been moving away from that for a long time, but that's a conversation for a different time.
Mhm.
um so you got a man who's being empathetic. How do we not attribute them to being a creeper? Because it kind of looks similar.
But it's weird because it's like I was trying to come up with an example, but if there's toxic masculinity, then the opposite, whatever that was, the opposite of that would be a more empathetic man, perhaps, but the perception of the more empathetic man is once again toxic masculinity. So it's like a boomerang, right? You're
Yeah, it's a
you're
double-edged
toxically
sword.
Yeah. So you're toxically masculine because you're exuding your power in a negative way. So you shift to the other end and you're like, okay, I'm going to be more empathetic. So I'm gonna listen better and I'm gonna feel more and try to assist in that way. But then now you're a creeper, which then makes you toxically masculine. So now you're back to here again, even though you're exactly the opposite. How do we reconcile that? Like, what the heck?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a tough one because that comes down to other people's perspectives. Like, I don't get to decide if somebody views me as empathetic, loving, caring, and kind. They have to decide if I'm
Yeah.
empathetic, loving, caring, and kind.
Yeah.
Well, you know, that same double edge, when we apply that to women, I think comes out with, well, they've slept with 5 people, they're a slut, versus, wait a minute, maybe that's not it. Because if we look at men on a scale and say they slept with 5 people, we're probably not going, they're a man whore. We're we just are we are applying a scale that may or may not be accurate, but it's based on our own bias. So for me as a therapist, I'm going, how do I get rid of my bias and more accurately assess any situation? Right? Like, let's say she slept with, 5 people. Does that mean she's a slut? I mean, what if this is a hypothetical, but this is how we empathize, right? We say, well, what if 3 of those died while they were in the relationship? Like, what if she just had a horrible string of like death come through her life, over the last 15 years? All of a sudden we're going, wait a minute, that's not somebody who's just given it up to anybody. Right. And, the same thing we'd have to do with the man who shows up. And what if that's just a man who's been lost before and somebody came along and rescued them and they're trying to pay it back? Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's weird. I don't know how, but to me, I guess well, I mean, that goes into like judgment territory now, because now we're putting our own, what if empathy is listening and now we're judging? Are we still empathetic?
No.
So see, then that's a tricky one too, because that's a social contagion now, because that's us looking outward, trying to look inward again.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we're looking at how others would perceive us. So we perceive ourselves as someone else who's perceiving us. And now we're judging someone else with those same perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not empathetic. That's just not listening.
No, empathy would be judging in a situation only by the scale of the other person.
In that situation.
Not by our own scale
or standards
as an observer.
Yes.
It's literally saying, I wonder what that man's past, present, future hopes and fears are. That's why empathy is really a lot about curiosity, because to judge the man who's helping the child, we have to know their past, present, and hopes and fears for tomorrow.
And the situation in its entirety.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know all of that at the same, you can't know that.
That's right. Empathy, I've talked about this on the podcast before. Empathy is a failing proposition. We will 100% fail at it. What it's designed to do, though, is to take judgment out of the equation and insert a healthy curiosity. That's by its design, because in order to attempt to see the world as if I'm somebody that I am not and never will be, I have to set aside all of my preconceived notions, my biases. And will I ever do that perfectly? Nope.
No chance
at all. No, but empathy gives us credit. We get credit relationally for attempting to see the world as if we are them. Like, if you come into a situation and somebody is really hurting and you align with them and you go into a pity party with them, you're actually taking credit. You're actually harming them.
Oh, yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about. That's where if someone comes to you and this kills me. I hate this. Someone comes to you and says, like my dog just died, right? Hit by a car, or we had to put him down, whatever it is. And within a minute of you telling someone that, they're telling you about their animal that died.
Yeah.
As if you want to hear that. Like, no, it's not about you. I'm currently grieving. You
Right.
did grieve.
Yep.
And that's how it messes with my brain so much. I hate that.
Mm-hmm.
And but I fail at that sometimes too. And I catch myself and I'm like, oh, I just jack that up.
When we want to talk about social norms, do you think it's more men who fall for this or women who fall for this?
Oh, dude, you're putting me on the spot.
I know.
I would say, oh, dude, okay, I'm gonna guess. I'm gonna say that. Well, I'm gonna caveat this. I'm gonna say that more women probably fall for this, only because most men aren't really good at listening. So hearing what was just said and then reverting into that is less likely.
Mm-hmm.
That's my deal. But I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying that's my thought.
Mm-hmm. So statistically speaking, and I don't have the data in front of me, but I do remember the data is dramatically one-sided and it leans towards women fall for it. And it kind of makes sense when we put it in perspective, because with masculinity and the perception of masculinity, what men tend toward is, dude, that sucks. Okay, now do you want to play some baseball? Like,
Yeah.
It's unfortunate because it's not a great level of empathy. Like it's typically not enough to move the person to fully to the healthy spot. And yet it's also not the pity party. It's not the, I'm going to join you in the mess and share my mess with you now that you're in the mess, and make it our mess. And now we're just going to sit here and stew over. Like, typically that's not what men do. Right or wrong, I'm not saying that one is better than the other, but they're matter of fact, I would actually argue both of them suck. Because
I agree.
you
Men need
gotta,
a little more and women maybe need a little less.
yep.
But,
and so
yeah.
So that they're not putting, because in the clinical world we call it countertransference. Are you familiar with that term?
No, man, that's a big word.
Countertransference is, as a therapist, if I sit in the room with somebody and they're transferring information to me, that's called transference, right? There is a certain level of risk as a therapist sitting in a room, having somebody say, yeah, I've done this bad thing and this bad thing. And, me being like, I don't like you, right? That would be them transferring their stuff onto me and me creating a judgment or something of that nature. But countertransference is me putting my stuff on them. And this typically will happen. So many therapists, I do storytelling as a fair amount of intervention, not like, I don't know, not every time. A lot of it, I'll become a professor temporarily, I'll teach concepts. Sometimes I am relational and I'm just listening and just taking it in and asking questions. And then sometimes I will share some personal anecdotal information as a way of helping them see the multitude of possibilities, but from a view that's not their own, because it's easier to take in and learn that way. And so in that process, though, I can transfer my crud onto them. And if I do that, then I am risking, in the ethics, we've got, autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, justice, fidelity, and veracity. Well, the second one is non-maleficence, which means to do no harm. Well, if I'm transferring my stuff onto them, if I'm giving them additional baggage, I'm actually harming them.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to be super careful that if and when I go into empathizing in a way where it's sharing, that I am not putting my stuff on them, but creating a caveat for them, like a pathway for them to decide for themselves and do their healing.
Like creating a little mini world that they can view the situation through that's not theirs. So devoid of, almost like devoid of feeling, but not devoid of reason. You're trying to get them to see that without their, not through their lens of emotion, in a sense.
Yes.
Sort of.
Kind of. Okay. So the only what you said, I really, really liked, except the one part where devoid of emotion, because emotion is part of the experience. And we don't want to totally, so I often will say head, heart, soul. We got to account for all three, the biological, psychological, sociological, cultural, spiritual. Biological is like the brain. Psychological, sociological, cultural is like the heart, and environmental, and then the spiritual at the end. And so I typically would say that. And then when we recreate the world, we don't want to devoid it of emotion. We don't want to take all the emotion out of it, because then it makes it seem like the emotion is the bad thing. But emotions aren't good or bad. They are information.
They're just real.
Yeah, we want emotion, but we want to be able to accurately assess the emotion with the balance of the brain.
So instead of like 90% emotion, 10% reason, you're trying to get it down to like 60-40 or 40-60, whatever it is, that it's still there, but it's not the overwhelming component of it.
Absolutely.
Got it.
So it's a tough process when you go down that empathy pathway. Because honestly, the one thing, the hardest part of it is not passing judgment. It's the single most difficult part of it, because, so for instance, a person sits down and pity parties with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
What they're doing is passing a judgment. They don't know they're doing that. They think they're empathizing, but what they're actually doing is passing a judgment. Their judgment is this: oh, I've been in the same spot as you. That's a judgment.
I know exactly how you feel.
I know exactly how you feel. I know what you're thinking. That's a judgment. Okay.
So that's where like the toxic masculinity component of, like, hey, my buddy just, punched me in the face, and I'm telling you, and I'm like, well, that sucks, man. But whatever. Then so there's a balance there, because there's very little empathy. There's no pity party, and it's just like, get over it and move on. So that's a good thing in a sense, but then there's still a reason why they're telling you, in a sense, because even though physically, like as a man, like, yeah, okay, fine, punch you in the face, it's not a big deal, whatever, get over it. But there's more to it than just a punch in the face. Like, does that sever the relationship in any kind of way? And for most of us, we get over it. We've been in fights when we were little, and by recess, we're playing again, right? Like as boys. But there's still a need there, right? I mean, like, even if it's just a little more than that. Yeah.
Yeah, both of those versions encourage weakness in the individual in front of us. The individual who comes in and says, oh, I've been there, I know exactly how you feel, is telling the person that you can't do this on your own. Like, it's impossible. You need somebody like me to come in and rescue you from your feelings, your thoughts, and all of that stuff. Here, let me sit in this with you. And I get, like, okay, so there's a nuance there, because there's a certain amount of dependency in relationships. But when we sit and we tell somebody you can't do this on your own, that weakens them. The other version is more or less, it comes across as, why are you telling me this? suck it up, put some dirt on it, and let's go.
Like, I don't
And
care or
it's
whatever.
almost the I don't care because we've all been there. It's almost that same judgment.
It's the same judgment. Yeah. It's just in a different mode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Whereas in all reality, it's like, yeah, you got thoughts, you got feelings. And depending on the scenario that we're in, you may need to rub some dirt on it. We'll come back to it. But that's what we should say. We should say, hey, look, we got this game to go get to. Suck it up. I'll hang out with you afterwards and we'll process this. But for right now, like, let's push forward. Right? That is a totally different, much less judgmental. It's more of a, hey, we're going to consider the environment we're in, which is we got to push forward, but let's come back to this. It's tabling the topic. It's saying you are important. This is important. Mm-hmm. I know you got, things going on here, and I don't know what all of them are. And I'm willing to give you my time, my love, my care, but we got to push forward. Which is how we take toxic and just turn it into masculine. Because saying environmentally, we've got to push forward, but I know there's more here. Is saying I'm going to withhold my judgment. We're going to get to the other side of this situation, and then we're going to come back and process. It's totally different thing.
It's your classic military story, right? I mean, friends dying here, friends dying here. Mm-hmm. Objectives here, and if that objective isn't reached, all of us are going to die, and you got to just put that aside, meet that objective, and then process. And that's kind of, but here's the thing. So segue back to the toxic masculinity, then all of it, the violence, or the, what do you call it, the social dominance, is towards the feminine. That's specifically what toxic masculinity is referring to. So it's the misogyny, hatred towards women, homophobia, the hatred towards, say, a feminine male, right? And then sexual assault, right? And then domestic violence. It's an attack. Toxic masculinity is specifically attack of the feminine.
Except even within our social norms, that still doesn't fit. Because we know now, over the last, 30 years, we've learned a ton of stuff about homosexuality. And mm-hmm. homosexuality is the whole spectrum.
Okay, but it's not still
feminine. It's not a feminine male.
No. You're right.
Masculine male.
Correct. But it's the socialized idea of it that is being attacked. Absolutely. And so it's still a roundabout's way of attacking the feminine in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it could be argued that. Yeah. I mean, I can see that argument. Yeah. I think it falls apart in reality.
Right. But if that's the only one, then that's one of four. Right.
Yeah. That's
so that's what I'm saying. I think it's still attack of the feminine. I think that's what they're getting at with this definition. I don't know. I mean, this is Wikipedia. There might be a better definition somewhere in your book. So. I mean,
I really hope so. I mean, this made for a better conversation because, it's taking the cultural stuff, not not necessarily reality. Right. It did a good job of telling us the cultural view of it. And
okay. But wait, is toxic masculinity anything other than cultural then? Because maybe there isn't. Maybe literally that's part of the problem.
No, because when you add the word toxic in there, you're talking about what we have decided is toxic. For instance, there was something about one of the it was a Montana representative, somebody in in a federal position, Senate, they're in the House. I don't know where they are, but they posted a picture of them hunting. They were there on the ground with their I don't even know what it was, but they had gone hunting, and so there was a picture of them with their wife and their kill. Mm-hmm. And it actually got them banned from Twitter or something temporarily because it was considered violence. Well, it's toxic, like
hunting is violence. Yeah,
apparently that's toxic. So when we talk about the word toxic, we automatically have to fall in the realm of what are considered cultural norms. However, that even opens up a caveat that we definitely don't have time for, because cultural norms are often dictated by what we see the most, hear the most, not necessarily what we experience the most. For instance, go down the path of the media, what the media puts out, and they put out all of this stuff happens. And the thing is, what they're doing is cherry picking sometimes for their story. And I get why they do it, but they cherry pick all over the country for these 10 examples. It might be, 10 of 20, but they make it look like it's all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Or, the racism, like that's toxic racism right now. I mean, we're just seeing these, but how prevalent is the racism? I mean, I know it exists. I'm not naive, but does it exist to the level at which we are exposed to it? And that's a totally different topic, but
yeah,
it's an interesting one that maybe one day we'll go down the path of.
Sure.
So just out of curiosity, of the things we talked about today, what are the highlights for you? What is did you have any of those moments where you were like, huh, that's interesting?
Yeah, I mean, the discussion around empathy, I think, is kind of important, and the different scales of empathy, the indifferent version and the excessive version being essentially the same, and that can affect the individuals in the same exact way, even though one overdoes it and the other one just like, yeah, whatever, and then moves on. That's kind of interesting, because I'd never really thought about that in that way before. Like, empathy to me was always the excessive way, and indifference was just indifference, but they're both the same. That's cool to me.
Yeah. That's super interesting. My big takeaway, you said something about environmental when it comes to masculinity. And the more I'm processing that, I'm not sure where I land yet, but the more that I'm processing it, the environmental impact of masculine male, as I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about like how soft and loving and gentle some men have been in my world until the environmental need rose. And so now I gotta figure out what that means, because I think that might be an actual key element to true masculinity as opposed to toxic masculinity. I think the environmental part, I got to tease that out some.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what to do with that exactly at the moment, but that was interesting for sure.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and we're going to wrap up here so that we can get on with our day. And I appreciate you joining us. At Healthy Perspectives, we're just trying to help. And, now you're being part of that, which selfishly I love, because I get to hang out with you for a little bit. And then hopefully it's beneficial to everybody else as well. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.